Last week, we ran an interview with Ryan Morrow of the Clarion Project. Here's our second installment about his views on the growing threat of ISIS and radical Islam.
The most powerful recruitment tool of ISIS is the fact that they can argue that they were successful. One of the most important lessons in understanding the jihadist ideology, particularly when they argue with each other, is if they say, okay, we have a disagreement, well, who is succeeding? Because that's who Allah is blessing. If an unpopular jihadist group starts grabbing territory, as ISIS did, 1/3 of Syria, 1/3 of Iraq, all of a sudden those that previously doubted that group say, well, obviously Allah must be blessing them. And that is why we can never allow a group like ISIS to have what appears to be momentum or to be victorious, because that sends the message throughout the Muslim world that they are accurately implementing God's will. And then that's what draws recruits to them. So it's very important that whenever they seize territory that we take action for them to lose it. As for the issue of foreign fighters, we know that an estimate 12 to 15,000 foreign fighters have joined ISIS. In terms of the Americans, the estimates are somewhere between 100 and 300 have gone over to Syria to either join ISIS or another jihadist group. So that's obviously a very big threat. There was a Democratic congressman that said that 40 Americans that were linked with ISIS overseas have already come back to the United States. But what I'm most concerned about is the lesson that the Muslim world is learning from ISIS's success. Are they learning that this is the way you take on the West and that this is what Allah wants? And American weakness magnifies that perception that ISIS is the right way forward.
President Obama, when he spoke to the nation about ISIS, he said that it wasn't Islamic, or the Islamic State wasn't Islamic, and at the UN he called Islam a religion of peace. Do you think that he's muddying the waters and making it confusing for people about what is really real Islam?
Yes, definitely. I think that the problem with President Obama declaring the Islamic State not to be Islamic or a state is that it removes the responsibility away from the Muslim world in explaining why this is happening. If we acknowledge the truth, that this is at least an interpretation of Islam, you don't have to say it's the right interpretation, but you have to acknowledge that it is an interpretation of Islam. They are quoting the Quran, they are quoting Islamic scripture, it's an interpretation of Islam. When that's acknowledged, then Muslims have to explain and say, oh, well, this is why we disagree with that. That theological battle has to take place, but the starting point for that dialogue to take place is acknowledging that the problem here is an interpretation of Islam. It's the combination of mosque and state and turning Islam into a political doctrine. A great example of this is the fact that there's all this positive press right now about Muslim leaders around the world, including many here in the United States, that wrote a letter with a rebuttal to ISIS, a theological rebuttal. And I read it, and much of it sounded great, but then I came across a few different passages that really bothered me. Yes, they condemned the tactics of ISIS, but they endorsed resurrecting the caliphate, which requires the destruction of Israel. And most amazingly, they endorsed Sharia law, specifically including the punishments in relations to criminal justice. The most horrific parts of Sharia law were endorsed by the Muslims that the United States government and the media is praising for condemning ISIS. So does that really make them moderate? I don't think so.
What's their final goal?
Well, the same goal of all jihadists, whether they are nonviolent or violent, whether they agree with the tactics of Al-Qaeda and ISIS or not, is always implementing Sharia over the entire globe. In the short term, it's implementing it in the Muslim lands. Then it's creating a caliphate, then it's destroying Israel. But the end goal always is Sharia over the entire globe. And one of the interesting developments I've seen particularly with ISIS and other jihadists, is how much they're wrapping themselves in end times theology. Whenever a jihadist talks about, oh, we're going to break the cross, or America, we condemn you for being the protector of the cross, what they are referencing is an end times Islamic prophecy where they believe Jesus comes back, helps their Islamic Messiah defeat Christianity and the Jews and the rest of the world, and they believe that Jesus comes, helps the jihadis defeat Christianity, and then bans Christianity. So there's much more to it whenever you hear a jihadist saying, oh, we're going to break the cross. That's not just a threat to the United States and to Christianity. They are saying that they are creating the conditions for their version of Jesus to show up and help them conquer the world.
Is the United States the main impediment to establishing Sharia law all over the world?
Yes, and Israel, and also Europe. But the reason that Israel receives so much hatred from the jihadists is because they stand right in the way of the short-term goals they need to achieve in order to accomplish that long-term goal of attacking the United States. And so the reason that Israel gets all the attention is because they are the first stumbling block for the jihadist agenda. After that, it's Europe and the United States. They condemn all of us, but right now they really need to focus on the countries in the region and primarily Israel.
Appreciate you being here with on Jerusalem Dateline.
All right, thank you so much.
Coming up, American evangelicals unite on Capitol Hill to support Israel. Former presidential candidate Mike Huckabee says Israel's enemies also have America in their sights.
Israel isn't the ultimate target, we are.